Hey guys, my name's Joe Stillwell, and this is the Rebel's Advocate. And this is a very special episode because it is my very first video ever uploading to YouTube. So please don't judge me too harshly. It's my first time. Not my first video, just my first video I'm uploading. I've already recorded a couple, but they were horrible, as this one also probably is. What I found out is I'm not only socially awkward around others, but I'm also camera shy. There's no one around, no one in the house. The wife is out shopping, and when I set up a camera, I'm scared to death. So I'm trying to get used to it. The camera is my best friend. I'm going to say probably nobody's going to watch this video anyway, except for you. But you don't count. Anyhow, this first video, I hope to do a series of videos, just talk about some things that I can't talk about with many other people around me where I live, and you'll see why later. And various issues. I'm going to talk about religion a lot, and this first video is going to be a bit of an introduction to me, and I realize you probably don't care to be introduced to me because you don't even know me. I've never put out a video, so why would you care to get to know me? But I feel like you need to know me before I can really get into anything I want to talk about in the future. First of all, I was born and raised a fundamentalist Christian, and a lot of Christians don't understand what fundamentalist Christian means. And basically, when I say that, what I mean is we follow the Bible pretty strictly. I wouldn't say exactly, because I don't think I've ever met anyone that follows the Bible exactly to a T as far as what it says, but we were among the stricter here in America anyway. Outside of, we weren't Westboro Baptist crazy. We aren't Amish. We did have vehicles, so we weren't the strictest, but you know, we were up there. And now I am a skeptic and an atheist and an overall realist who questions everything. And I want to talk about how I got to that point. First of all, raised in church. When I left church at about age 18. To be completely honest with you, the reason I left wasn't because I decided there was no God. I left because I wanted to have fun. Because at my church, church for the average American probably doesn't affect that person a whole lot. You go to church, it really doesn't affect your life overall. Everything pretty much goes on as usual. You just get up a little earlier on Sunday than I do, and you go to church and you feel good and all that. However, for me, growing up, church, being a Christian meant no TV, no going to movies, no going to the pool hall and the arcade and doing all those things I wanted to do, no drinking, no smoking, no dating women outside of my faith, and which was a very limited pool. So I wanted to have fun, and honestly that is why I left the church, for that reason and no other. And I went and I had my fun. I had quite a bit of it. And then somewhere in my 20s I began to ask a lot of questions, which I always questioned. I always asked questions even when I was in church. I was that annoying kid who was always asking, well, why this and why that? Why is it this way? I don't think I ever really questioned, was there a God? That was just a given. I knew there was a God. And atheist I met one atheist when I was a kid, and it blew my mind. He was actually working on the church right below where I live, and I didn't even believe him. I'm like, I didn't think atheists exist. But they do, as I was to find out later. But, you know, I would ask questions about the faith, but I never really questioned God. And then I left the church, and I tried not to think a whole lot about, you know, my faith or religion. I tried to put it behind me and just, have fun, but it's always in the back of your mind, because we believed in hell, fire, and brimstone and all that good stuff. So every day was, if I were to die today, I'll wake up in hell. And it's a sobering thought. That's something to live with, especially when you're kind of living on the edge, so to speak. I remember that song by Aerosmith, right? Living on the edge. It has a whole different meaning when you're a God-fearing backslider. You believe in God and you believe in hell, but you're not in church, and you believe that if you died any second, you'll go to hell. That's a scary way to live. I always had this fear. There was this one moment in my life that made me question a lot of things, and because I always had this fear that, or not necessarily, well, it was a fear, but also I just felt like that one day I was going to die in a car crash. I felt like that's how I would go. And I always wondered if I would have time to pray if that was to happen, and I knew, this is it, I'm going to die. If I had time to call out, would God hear me? Would He forgive me in that split second, or would it be too late? I wasn't sure, but I hoped, that I could get that prayer in. And I actually had a car accident not long after I got out of church. And I remember the thought crossing my mind, like, should I pray? But I felt like the accident wasn't bad enough as it was happening. Like, I think I'll pull through this. And I did. I pulled through. I didn't die, and I didn't pray. But some years later, I think it was in 2003, somewhere in there, I had a bad car accident. It wasn't good. Luckily, I walked away without a scratch, and I lived, as you can see. But it was a bad wreck. And I remember when it happened, the car kicked sideways, or the SUV that I was driving. It kicked sideways, and I was going into a high wall. And at that moment, I knew. I didn't think I was going to die. I knew in my head that this was it. I'm gone. Of course, I was wrong, but at that moment, I was, I felt 100% certain this is it. And it's so weird. Like, I don't know how long it took from the time my vehicle kicked sideways to the time it slammed into the high wall, but I'm guessing at the most 2 seconds, And once it hit the high wall, I knew, there was no thinking much after that. So in those 2 seconds, you would think you wouldn't have time to really think of much, but it was crazy what went through my head in just that short amount of time. And I remember the first thought was, of course, I'm dead. This is it. I'm gone. The second thought was, okay, it's time to pray, right? It's like you've practiced, you've run this drill in your head all your life, and now it's happening. And now's my moment, and now's my moment to see. And so it was, that thought was, okay, now you have to pray. And it was like I almost said the words, not out loud, but in my head, like, God forgive me. But I didn't even get it out. And it was like instantly I realized, like, I don't mean it. If God was to reach down right now and say, okay, not only will I save your soul, but I'm going to save you from this car wreck, I knew, I was like, I'm not going to go to church. I'm not going to do it. And so I just stopped, and I just accepted my fate, and I held on to the steering wheel and just waited for what was about to happen. And then I slammed into the high wall. I spun back out into the road and flipped several times down the highway, and I didn't even realize I was flipping. I really couldn't see anything. It was just noise and a lot of shaking. And when it come done, when it was all over, I was on my top, and I did the check from head to toe, and I step out, and I'm unscathed pretty much. I mean, I was very sore later, but not a scratch on me as far as I can remember, and walked away from it. And I remember after that, thinking back and realizing kind of the decision I made, and it baffled me. It was like, how can you believe in something as horrible as hell? And you're talking about, I'm not a fearless guy. I'm a guy who goes to the hospital and is scared to death of needles, right? I can't stand needles. And yet here I am, I believe in hell, the absolute worst pain that a human could endure, like the physical body cannot even endure. Somehow it's the next level with your soul and pain that we can't even imagine. And here I am, like, I believe this, and yet I'm saying, bring it on, because I'm not going to give in. I'm not going to bow down and ask for forgiveness. And it almost makes you start wondering, do I actually believe this? And I was almost afraid to ask that question because I never questioned. I questioned a lot of things, but I never questioned God. Is God real? And at that moment, I don't know. It was a life-changing experience. That it didn't change me immediately, but I think there was a seed there that made me start wondering. Do I really believe this? How can you believe this and not be in church just every single night? Just, oh, there's no way I can mess up. There's no way I can go to hell. I have to do everything every single day that I can to make it to heaven. And if you really believed in heaven and you really believed in hell, it kind of makes sense that, you would do anything. So, years went by, really nothing changed per se. Years went by and I kind of lived my life, and then I began to ask a lot of questions about religion, and I talked to a lot of people, and we'd get in arguments. Not the kind of arguments you would think where I'm arguing against God, but we would argue about our beliefs. And I was raised Pentecostal holiness, and then I would find myself in these kind of debates with people I worked with, or friends that were in the same boat as me. They grew up in church, but they were out of church, but they still believed in God also. So we'd get talking, and most of the time these arguments would go around where they'd be like, they'd always pick on my church, and it would be, yeah, you don't have to do all that, women don't have to have long dresses and long hair, and the guys don't have to keep short hair, and no beards, and no shorts, and no TV, and all that. And they go, and then I would actually argue in favor of our church, believe it or not, even though I didn't want to believe that way. I'd be like, oh, well, actually, if you're going to live by the Bible, there's a lot of Bible to back it up. And we'd go through that, and argue back and forth. And what I got to noticing was the people I was arguing with, they were indoctrinated. I got to noticing if they were born and raised Baptist, it was like they would try to point me, to the Baptist church. This is the way you're supposed to live. And then if they were Methodist, they'd point me that way, or whatever. And I was like, these people are they've been brainwashed one certain way. They've been indoctrinated, and they can't see past the way they were raised, right? And then it kind of hits you as like, oh, what if that's my problem? Is it possible that I'm the one who's kind of brainwashed? And then, you start questioning things like that. And then you're like, whoa, take it a step farther. What if I'd been born on the other side of the world? What if I'd been born, to a Hindu family? What if I'd been born to a Muslim family? Would I be diehard Muslim? Would I be out of the religion, but thinking, oh, one day I got to get back to Allah? Probably. But would I be right or would I be wrong? And man, those questions started really getting to me. And it was around this same time that I was starting to consider getting back into church, because it had always been my plan. One day I'm getting back in church, and actually it affected my life in a big way. There's always a part of me that's like, I can never actually fall in love with a girl or marry a girl that's outside the church, because one day I'm going to make it back to the church. One day I'll find a girl back in church, I'll get in church, we'll get married, have a family, I'll probably end up being a preacher, just like my dad was a preacher. All these plans. But so I start thinking, and I can remember as early as 2007, thinking about it, and now I was having all these thoughts about, maybe the church I was raised in isn't right. So now the predicament is, if I'm going back to church, I got to figure out which church I belong to. So how am I going to do that? Everybody's preaching something different, and I'm listening, I'm trying to figure out, okay, show it to me in the Bible, and let's figure this out. And that's when it dawned on me, that's where it's at. It's the Bible. That is the only thing there is to go by. It doesn't matter what anybody says, it's all in the Bible. It's literally the only thing. If you want to be a Christian, it is the only thing you have to go by, is the Bible. So, and I had read it, just since the time I was a kid. I'd read it. I'd had to memorize verses. I went to not only to church, but I went in Sunday school. I'd have to memorize verses at times, but also went to a Christian school where, I was taught the Bible there as well, and I would have to memorize, so many scripture verses every month. I knew the Bible, pretty much all the Bible stories, and when I would read it, back when I was a Christian, I think I would read it as if something I had to do, but every time I would read it, I felt like I already know these stories, I already know what's happening. So it's almost like you were reading it just as a chore, as something you had to do to be a Christian. But I was like, this time I'm out of church. I want to try to just clear my mind of everything I know about the Bible, and I want to read it again, just front to back, Genesis to Revelations, Old Testament, New Testament. But this time I want to actually understand it and read it like it's the first time I've ever picked it up. And I just wipe my mind of everything I've been taught, any indoctrination, and I'm going to pick up the Bible, read it, and figure out how I have to live to be a Christian, right? I want, just like the verse says, work out your own salvation, right? A lot of people quote that, but they leave off the back part of that verse, and I may be getting it a little wrong, but it says to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, if I remember correctly. I know it had to do with something with fear. And so that's how I wanted to approach it. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't me trying to find an easier way. This was legitimately me trying to find the truth. And so I picked the Bible up and I started reading. And man, you cannot get through Genesis, when you're reading the Bible truly with an open mind, trying to learn, trying to find truth. You can't make it through Genesis without having a lot of questions, a lot of serious questions. And suddenly in my head, I'm thinking, man, none of this makes sense. How am I supposed to not only believe in this God, because so many things are so unbelievable, but how am I supposed to love this God? This God that, commands people to be murdered by, the thousands and possibly millions, just all the time for the littlest things, This God who has ridiculous rules and laws that make no sense unless you were, ancient man living back then. I'm sure it made plenty of sense back then. You're talking about, and that's the thing. You're looking at it and you're like, yeah, this makes sense that it was written by men that lived back in this time, in such a primitive time that, this is men that believed in all sorts of gods and all sorts of weird rituals. And I mean, what kind of, you start asking questions like, what's the deal with the animal sacrifices? And of course, I mean, if you knew someone today that had a religion where they had to go out and butcher an animal and lay it up on an altar of rocks and set it on fire, and their god, they believed their god was in the sky, and could smell it, and it was a sweet smell, and that was something their god commanded them to do, well, we would think they were crazy. And regardless of whether Christians do that today, the God they serve, that's what he commanded, right? In the Bible. And it made sense back then, but they had, he sent his son to die and we don't have to do it. Well, even that. Why? Why did he send Jesus to die? Who made that rule? You understand, God, if you believe in God, the Christian God, He is eternal. He is all-powerful. He is the supreme being. There's no one above him. He is the rule maker. Okay? There's no one above him that makes rules. He made those rules. When he created the universe and us, and this is presupposing that God is real, right? If he created the universe, he created us, he knows everything. He knew we were going to mess up. He knew that he was going to have to send his son to die, and blah, blah, blah. But why? He had to make those rules that required him to send his son to... Why does he need a blood sacrifice to forgive me? Of what? Forgive me of what? Of using the free will that he gave me? He gave me free will, yet I go to hell for using it. What kind of free will is that? And so these are all the questions that's running through my head. I'm reading this. I'm reading Genesis where, original sin, when Adam and Eve ate of the fruit, right? Of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And I'm like, okay, they had no knowledge of good and evil before they ate. By the way, that's my cats going crazy in the corner. Just on a side note, since they interrupted me, if you ever become an atheist, you will own cats. It's just something we have to do as an atheist. There may be atheists that tell you that's not true, that they hate cats and they're dog lovers or whatever, but they're lying. They're not true atheists. They're not atheists. Trust me. If they were, they would own cats. It's a thing. Anyway, I don't know where I was at, but all these questions about all this, and Adam and Eve, they had no knowledge of good and evil before they ate of the tree, right? Yet, so they got punished for doing evil before they had knowledge of good and evil. Now that's another little thing. But all those questions keep adding up, right? And I don't want to say it out loud. Like, I don't even want to think it out loud. Is there a God? But that's the question bubbling up. And I'm going to be honest with you. I think I was an atheist at that moment. But, I didn't know it. I didn't want to admit it. Because you don't decide to be an atheist. A lot of people think one day you wake up and you choose to not believe in God anymore. But that doesn't happen. You see, you can't choose what you believe. I mean, you either believe it or you don't. And one day, I no longer believed. But I didn't want to say that out loud. I don't think I wanted to admit that. So I started having a lot of questions, and then I turned to YouTube. And I remember I would sit up late at night on my computer, and I would type in Christian versus atheist, and I was like, because I could remember as a kid watching debates in school, and I'm talking really young, elementary school, before I could really understand stuff, and they would have us watch these debates between like evolutionists and creationists. And I remember watching those, and we were all like, "Yeah, the creationists won." But now, like, I don't. I would love to know which videos they were. I have no idea who the people were now because I was so young. I would love to see them again because I'm pretty sure the creationists didn't win, but we all thought they did. So I was like, maybe I should look up debates like that, and I'll look them up, and the Christian is going to whip the atheist, and I'm going to be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You totally, fixed my head because I had all these weird questions. I was like, they'll straighten it out. And I went and watched them, and the first one I watched, I don't even know who it was, but the Christian lost the debate, in my mind anyway. If you can argue whether there's a real winner or loser in a debate, but I was just like, oh man, that wasn't good. And so I watched another one. And you gotta remember, at this time, I didn't even, like, atheist was something weird. Like, I live in the Bible Belt of America. There's no atheists. I mentioned I met the one atheist when I was a kid. That was like a rare find. Like, you just don't run into atheists here. Although nowadays it's becoming a little more common, especially with younger people. I found that's good news, and we'll talk more about that later. But so I didn't know anybody. I didn't know Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, like none of those guys. I didn't know them, and so I would watch different videos, and I'd come across some that scared me. Even Richard Dawkins, I remember, scared me because to me he was a little too blunt, and sometimes there were times I'd almost have to kind of, I don't know, I would grimace a little and turn away, because to hear someone just flat out say there is no God and blah blah, talking that way, it seemed blasphemous, and just it scared me, to be honest, to a certain degree. It's like, I don't know about that. But when I found Sam Harris, that was a pretty big deal, a game changer for me, no doubt, because Sam Harris just speaks in that calm, still voice, and he has a way of breaking things down. And I remember I started just hitting the search bar, just Sam Harris, and watching everything I could find on him. And I'd watch him in all these debates and different talks, just about anything I could find on YouTube. And it's just for hours. I'd sit there and watch different things, and I was struggling with all these questions, and I started to realize, everything I've been taught, from a kid, it might not be true. And it was scary. It was exciting. It kind of, a lot of things changed. It's hard to explain when you believe something, not just believe something, but this is the cornerstone of your entire life. You built, your entire life was kind of built around this supposed truth that, there is a God, He is real, and this is how you have to live if you want to go to heaven. And so all of a sudden, all that comes crumbling down. And so when all that comes crashing down around you, and it's a lot to take in. And so here I was left, trying to figure out my life now. I don't really know how, where it's going to go from here. But there comes this point where the fear, it turned from fear to peace and kind of a happiness, and I can't explain it. It was just like, all of a sudden, you don't have to try, and when you truly look for truth, and you truly accept truth when you find it, all of a sudden you don't have to try to do these mental gymnastics to make what you want to believe work. But all you have to do is say, I'm not afraid of the truth. I'm not afraid of what I might find. And you just, you just look for the truth, and you don't care what the truth is. I want to believe the truth, and it doesn't matter if it contradicts what I believe my whole life. And all of a sudden you get excited. Life is brand new. All of a sudden anything's possible. And yeah, maybe I won't go to heaven when I die. Maybe I won't get to see my loved ones that went before me. But you know what else? I also won't live every single day in fear, of hell. I won't live every single day with self-guilt, thinking there's something wrong with me, that everything I do is, somehow bad. I'm guilty of thought crimes, all these things, like, I'm never good enough. That's one of the things. If you believe in God, if you believe in the Bible, then you believe you're unworthy of anything. Like, no one believes they're worthy of heaven. You're unworthy. It's just, Jesus, he died for you, so now I guess we'll let you in, even though you're not good enough. None of that makes sense. And all of a sudden I got happy about it, and I happily called myself an agnostic, because atheist was too big of a word for me. So I was an agnostic. And don't get mad, because I'm in a lot, I'm in a lot of groups on Facebook, and some of those groups are agnostic groups, and they get really upset, if you call them an atheist, because and I understand, I don't get in those arguments. I don't care what you call yourself. And it's a funny story of how I went to accept the term atheist. I'll tell you in a second. But I think, like a lot of agnostics, I thought and I believe that saying you were an atheist was saying there is no God. I know there is no God. And it's not. It's just the lack of belief in a God. It's just, I no longer believe in a God. It isn't I'm saying that I'm coming out and saying, hey, there is no God, I can prove it 100%. Maybe there's something, I can't prove it's wrong. I'm about 99.9999999% sure that the Christian God, or the God of the Quran, or any of those gods, I'm pretty sure they don't exist. And I know more about the Christian God. That's the one I grew up, and just reading the Bible, I can tell you, I literally have, now that I've read the Bible, and one thing that's got me wanting to do these videos is I'm wanting to talk about, because I'm reading the Bible again. It's been several years now since I've become an atheist, and I kind of put the Bible down, and I haven't picked it back up in all those years, but now I'm starting to read it again, and so it's got me wanting to talk about it. And I can tell you, man, reading it again, like, and this time I'm reading it because when I become an atheist, after that I really didn't pick up the Bible anymore. I would read around, like, different verses here, now and again, but now as an atheist I'm starting from Genesis, and so far I've went Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and I'm in, I think, chapter 30 in Numbers, and I'm going through the whole thing. I'm hoping to do it in a year, maybe less, hopefully, I don't know. But, and so it's, some of it is fascinating to read now, because it's like, wow, I like, now looking at it, I absolutely have no idea how any adult can read this book and believe it. I really don't. I don't know how a kid can believe it, can read it and believe it, let alone an adult. It's just like the blinders are off. And some of it is fascinating to read, and some of it's painfully boring. But I'm trying not to skip any of it, so I can say, yeah, I read every word of it. But, that gets difficult. But anyhow, back to how I finally accepted the term, or the label, atheist. When I become an agnostic, like I said, all of a sudden it went from this fear and being scared to, a whole new world opening up to me. Everything was changing, and I got excited. The only thing I can compare it to if there's any Christians watching this, you'll remember when you first become a Christian, when you first went to church and conviction fell on you, you were scared and you ran to the altar and you prayed, and then when you got back up, you felt so great, right? You felt brand new, like, oh, Jesus has saved me. And you just want to run and tell the whole world. Like, becoming an atheist, for me, I'm not saying this happens to everyone, but for me, it was the exact same feeling. And I just wanted to tell everybody. The problem is I live in the Bible Belt, so that didn't go over very well. And there's also, social media now, which wasn't there when I was younger. And so I think, it took some time, but I started letting subtle little hints slip on social media until finally I just blurted it out. And man, that did not go over well. And it crushed my family, which, I'm not happy about. And I hate that. It's a side effect of religion, and I hate that part of it because I know, there's a part of me that gets aggravated, but there's also a part of me that knows they still believe this. They believe that I'm going to end up in hell, so naturally I can kind of understand why they're so upset. But my mom, hopefully she don't watch this and hear this, but my mom was very concerned, and I remember she called my former pastor that I grew up under and wanted him to call me. And he's a guy who I still to this day love very much. He's a great guy, great man. And he called me and just talked pretty bluntly with me. And the thing is I respect him as probably knowing more about the Bible than anyone I know. And so when he called me, I was very early into losing my faith, and it was just like if anybody could talk me back into the faith, it was him, right? If anybody could lay to rest all these questions I had, it was kind of like watching those videos, the Christian versus atheist. Like, oh, the Christian's going to get them. Well, this guy, I was like, he can probably answer all those questions, and he had no answers, like, it kind of shocked me. I expected better answers. I didn't really expect him to change my mind, but I thought he's going to probably have some stuff that I'm going to have to go dig back into the Bible and try to figure out and work through, and this is going to take some time. But no, there was nothing there. And I remember him kind of asking me what I believed. I can't remember exactly how it come up, but I was like, well, I'm not an atheist. I'm an agnostic. I don't really know the truth. And he's like, you sound pretty much like an atheist. And I was like, nah, I'm an agnostic. I'm not an atheist. And then I would tell him what I believed and what I didn't believe, and he's like, yeah, that sounds pretty atheistic to me. And so I remember just kind of hanging up the phone after the phone call was over, and you've been like, I guess I'm an atheist. And so from that day forward, I've been an atheist. And it's honestly, it's been an exciting time. There's been a lot of trying times, and I've tried to find a balance, because you may ask why I even want to talk about religion. If I'm an atheist, why not? Why does it bother me that other people believe? Why do I want to talk about religion at all? Because I see a lot of religious harm, and these are things that I want to talk about in future videos. And because of that, and not just, there's a lot of things we can point to. We can point to laws where religious people want to get involved in laws, and they want to affect change and take away rights from people that are doing things that they believe is a sin, correct? Not things that affect them in any way, not things that make sense, any kind of common sense, but just things they believe is a sin. They want it to be outlawed, right? And so things like that, of course, could be religious harm, right? But not just that. I think the personal harm that is done by religion, the constant, guilt and shame and just beating yourself up and not feeling worthy, not feeling like a decent human being when you've done literally nothing, wrong. You're just a normal average person, and you beat yourself up day in and day out because you think some being is judging you for every thought that flashes through your head or every little thing you might not get perfect, and just constantly being afraid that you're going to go to hell. Things like that, I think need to be talked about. It makes me sad. And so I just kind of want to put these videos out there in case there's somebody like me, in the same shape I was back then, that has questions. I want them to see somebody that believed in God just as much as they do, and found a way out, found a better way, and is happy. And so in upcoming videos, I don't even know what I'll talk about. I'm reading the Bible again, like I said, so I'm gonna be talking about a lot of just the silly things I find. Like the animal sacrifices, things that we just we take for granted, we don't even think about until you really break it down. You're like, wow, that's crazy. Like it makes no sense whatsoever. So, and also, man, I'm reading Moses right now. I can't wait till we're done reading about Moses and this. I thought I couldn't really remember. I thought maybe that all ended in Exodus, because of the name of the book, Exodus. But no, like here we are in Numbers, and it's still going on. They're still wandering through the wilderness. So, probably talk a lot about that. If you're still watching this video, by the way, I thought this was going to be a 5-minute video, and I rambled on. I don't even know how long it is. If you're still watching, if anybody watched this, if you're still here, thank you so much for listening to me ramble. That was one of the things I was going to say. One of the reasons I was making this video, because living in the Bible Belt, I can't exactly talk about these things just openly, and even posting on Facebook. I try to stop. I'm like, I'm not going to make any more religious posts, and then I do it, and people get mad, and I'm like, so I started a blog, and I started on it, and then I really haven't done nothing with it. It's just kind of sit there, so I want to get started back on it. It's at therebelsadvocate.com. therebelsadvocate.com. So I'll probably try to get started back writing in it, and then I'm gonna have this YouTube channel, and that way maybe I can just keep my Facebook mostly just, hey, here's a picture of a cat, because atheists do have cats, right? And then I can get everything off my chest on my blog and here on YouTube, and maybe the world will, it'll help me cope with a lot of things. It's got a lot easier, a lot more accepting, because now it's like everybody knows now, and I think they've given up on me to a certain extent. So it's got a lot easier being an atheist in the Bible Belt. Plus, I've found out that there's a lot of young people growing up that around here that also don't believe in God. That's pretty cool. So if you're watching, thanks so much. And if you want to follow my journey and hear what I have to say, you can hit the subscribe button. You can hit the big thumbs up if you want. That would be great. You don't have to, because maybe you didn't like this video. But if you stuck around this long, you had to like it, right? If you hated it, you can hit the thumbs down, but that will make me sad, and it'll hurt my feelings. You can also email me at, oh boy, I hope this is right, because I haven't checked it, because I made a different email just in case anybody wanted to email me. You can comment or email me at joe.therebelsadvocate@gmail.com. I hope that's right. joe.therebelsadvocate@gmail.com. Thank you guys so much, and until next time, have a great day.